so much, Jared. Yeah, so as Jared said, my name is Sarah Wansley. I'm the Associate Artistic Director at Northern Stage. I use she, her pronouns. And I have with me here today some of my colleagues who work in our production department. And we thought we would just give you a little bit of a backstage peek into what they do and the kinds of theatrical problem solving they work on. And we have a couple items to show and tell. We'll try to hold it up to the camera for those of you at home. But before we dive in, I just want to ask each of you to introduce yourself and what your role is at Northern Stage, maybe just a tiny bit about your background in the theater.
Yeah, great. Hi, my name is Addison Calvin. I am the technical director at Northern Stage, which means I'm in charge of building all of the sets and communicating designers and such and such. My background in theater is I've been doing it since I was 6 years old. Technical theater has been a part of my life for many years. I've been a TD for about 7 years almost at this point, on off pretty much full time though. And that's a little bit about me.
Hi, I'm James Roeder. I'm the Props Master at Northern Stage. I've been doing theater since elementary school, 10, 12, I would say, starting off as performing and then slowly migrating to design and technical theater. Started off as a designer, went to school for that, and then started working as a props master once I left school. And that's a little bit about me.
Hi, I'm Helen Rooker. I'm the production manager at Northern Stage, which means I oversee all aspects of technical in the company. So I make sure that designers and department heads are communicating and keeping designs in scope and that they're all on task and achieving their goals as per the calendar, as well as kind of being something of a floater set of hands. So one day I might be an electrician for a day. I might, haul chairs into the courtyard theater for an afternoon, kind of doing a lot of the jack of all trades. Whatever we need someone's set of hands to do is something that I fill in on. I'm actually a local. I grew up in the Upper Valley, went to Hanover High School, where I started in stage management, which is overseeing all of the actors and technical elements of a specific production. So kind of what I currently do, but on a slightly smaller show by show scale. I left the Upper Valley to go to school and then ended up back at Northern Stage a few years ago, where I started as an intern, which was cool. And I'm now kind of supervising all of the folks that I was once interning for, which is a really wonderful and cool little journey to have been on. So.
And another secret is both Addison and Helen also direct. So it's not the case at all theaters, but at Northern Stage, all of our artists are technicians. All of our technicians are also artists. Although not all of our artists are technicians. That's something we're maybe working on. Okay, so I think first, maybe for folks at home who may not know the difference between scenery and props, can we start there? What counts as scenery and comes in Addison's world, and what counts as props and lands with James?
So, I get asked this question a lot through tours that come through my shop and even my own family. And sometimes we were wondering what my job is. And the way I like to describe it or define it is, if you took a show in a theater and after it's all been loaded in and it's all in the theater space, and you took the entire theater space, audience and everything, and you flipped it upside down, everything that fell off the stage, everything that fell and hit the ceiling as the theater turned upside down, that would be a prop. That would be defined as a prop. So that kind of encompasses everything that the actors come in contact with, whether that be a cup, a piece of furniture, shelving, and that also encompasses all of the dressing, like anything that you would find on a bookshelf, anything you would find in a cupboard or on a coat rack or anything of that kind of that idea that an actor would come in contact with. So anything that fell when you turn the theater upside down, that would be a prop. So that's a good way to think about it.
A great way to describe it.
Yeah. Okay, great. So can you walk us through a little bit from each of your perspectives, the design process? So let's say we have a show coming up. What is your first interaction with the designer? And then how do you follow it through to opening night?
Sure. I'll start because I think I start the earliest in the process. So the very first thing that happens once we've hired the team is we schedule what's called a design conference, when all the designers and the director come into the room and sit down and talk about their artistic idea about the show. So the director lays out kind of their inspiration and what they're feeling about the show, the direction that they're leaning, and each designer gets the chance to respond to that, as well as share their own perspective. And then from there, I facilitate all of the further conversations. So making sure that those designers and directors are talking to each other. And then once the designers have settled on what their designs are going to look like, we bring in the production teams, and I make sure that those teams are all talking to each other. So the scenic designer and Addison have to be in really close contact. So it's my job to make sure that those connections are happening and make sure that the designer isn't walking all over Addison or vice versa. Not that it would ever happen.
And as they were saying, that's kind of where my position in the process starts, is then the scenic designer and I begin to touch base and begin to talk about the larger elements, the things that wouldn't fall over if you flip the stage upside down. We start to talk about those elements. We start to discuss the nitty gritty details of, what does this carpet look like? What does this wall want to be? Is it see-through? Does it have a door that's hidden in it? All these wonderful, weird, magical things that make a show what a show is. And then soon after, I will take those draftings and start to build my own package so we can build it in space and make it paper to reality. And in that process, I begin to discuss with James where our line is for this specific show.
And the line varies from show to show.
Right.
It's never the same, because some shows might have a wagon that needs very specific things that would fall in my area, but the wagon may need to be built by scenery, or large scale pieces of furniture that the best thing that I can think of is a window bench, a bench that would normally be, installed into a wall if you were building a, realistic house, kind of scenically, and it had a window bench. It's a bench, so it's a piece of furniture, but technically it's built into the set. So
it's the wall.
It's the wall. So it's kind of a juggling act a lot of the times when it comes, between us two. So it causes us to work really closely together as well.
And I think something that not a lot of people know is how much creativity and ownership each of you have in the execution of the design. So the designer is giving you sketches and research and drafting, but they're not saying exactly, this is not an IKEA build by number. You have to do a lot of the problem solving of how are we going to actually build this in our space and materials, right?
Yes, 100%. So when I get that initial design and start drafting it to become the 3D, what you see on stage, a lot of that engineering comes in. It usually comes to us as a 2D image with, some pictures of I want it to feel like this, or I want it to look like this. And from that, me and James will take separate things that we're building for ourselves and say, great, it needs to look like this, but somebody has to dance on it while it spins 360 at the same time, and figure out how.
Because directors are terrible.
And figure out how the living room sofa can support 4 people doing that and also spin. And a lot of our artistic piece of that and our figuring all that out comes in those moments of, we know certain aspects that have to be structural and different that the designer may not understand how to do, or that's not what they do. So we fill in those gaps.
Exactly. I think I might have an example. We brought examples for you all to look at that might illustrate a little bit of how that will affect me. In our upcoming show of You're in Town, our designer has asked for money fans, large money fans that, kind of cabaret style fans that are comprised of money. And we got a relatively good just image of an idea of what they were thinking. And it was what you see here, just money that looks like it could be a hand fan. Well, when we first made it, it was very floppy. We made it out of paper. It was not stiff at all. So when we moved it, it was wrinkled, it would bend, it would crease very, very poorly, and it wouldn't hold up to the actions that would be required by the actors. So something we came up with in the engineering stage and kind of problem solving stage is we put a thin piece of sheet metal in between the 2 pieces of paper that the $100 bills are printed on. So that helped with the stiffness and kind of changed the dynamic and weight. Oh, sorry, Addison.
Just hit me with the sheet metal.
I did, but it helped with the weight and the stiffness and the structure of the fan itself, and made it a little bit more durable to hold up to the actions that the actors will be putting it through. So that's just one of the things where you get handed a design, you get handed a picture, and problems arise that you weren't planning on. And the designer had no idea that it would be a problem until you approach it from an engineering or a building standpoint. So that's just one example.
A huge part of these jobs is the trial and error of trying to figure out how to do something that shouldn't necessarily exist in a way that can take a real beating. So to have a fan like that, if I'm going to use it in my real life, I might use it once a week, or every once in a while I would pull out my money fan and like be all fancy with it.
As we do.
As one does. But the fan James has is going to be used for 2 hours, 8 shows a week by teenagers, which means it has to be really sturdy, really solid, and ready to really take that beating. So that like trial and error problem solving process, often we will intentionally beat up a prop to see if it will take being treated as it's going to be treated in the show.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm looking at the model for the set of Heisenberg, which is the play that I directed that these folks built this year. And I'm thinking of just a very simple object in the script. It's actually in the script with very few props, but there is one scene where the actress eats a yogurt. And so there were a number of things about that. First of all, it was a very specific named British yogurt rice called Müller rice. Well, I guess it's German, but the play was set in England and they had this specific kind of rice. So James first had to figure out how we were going to create the label for this yogurt, because it is not something that is sold in the US. So we're making a label for the yogurt. Then we have to think about the actor has to actually eat this on stage. So it has to actually be fresh yogurt. So then we're also planning with our stage managers, how many days in advance can we buy the yogurt and have it in the fridge and have the label. But then there were also a lot of conversations about she doesn't really have time on stage to finish the yogurt, and then she puts it back in her bag. And so there are many different problem-solving strategies of how she could put a half-eaten yogurt back in her bag and not have it get a mess. Because you would think like, oh, it doesn't matter, just like throw the yogurt in the bag and clean it later. But again, this is happening 8 times a week for many weeks. And the last thing anyone wants is like a bag full of moldy yogurt.
Yeah.
So this became like quite the problem solving. I don't know if there's anything about that prop you want to share.
I mean, that prop was definitely a big collaborative question mark, which was strange because it was such a small moment. And that's the thing in theater. There are small moments that can become so much more of a problem or a headache than you would think larger moments would be. And just using Heisenberg as another example, because Helen was in on this conversation, I was in on this conversation, Sarah, our scenic designer. In this set, we had to get a bed on stage very quickly, and a full-size bed. And because of how the set was designed, the only path that a full-size bed had to get on stage was through a normal size, 2.5 foot doorway. So if you think about the size of the bed, it doesn't really fit through a doorway. So we sat down and we came up with, do we fly the bed in from the grid? No, that causes, that has a bunch of other problems. Do we have stage managers and backstage crew lift it over and try and carry it on stage? No, that causes another problem. And we came up with the idea of me having to build and engineer a folding, what would be you could think about it as a futon, but it needs to look at like an actual, bed. So engineering some sort of folding bed that could fit through a doorway and then come on stage and unfold. So, it was a big collaborative, meeting on one prop. So that's kind of a regular thing for us, I think.
Yeah, and that bed prop specifically, also because the bed is rather heavy, and this was a 2-person show, and we wanted one actor. The assignment I cruelly gave James was also that this bed needed to be moved by one actor, ideally, and so the bed had to be on wheels. And so now we're talking about something on wheels, but then once it opened, it needed to stay still so that the actors could sit on it and not be sliding all over the stage. So James had one side on wheels and one side not on wheels so that it would stay flat. And you actually welded that bed frame.
Yeah,
right?
built it from scratch. Yeah, because you can't buy a bed.
No.
It's impossible. It's not really. You can't go on Amazon and find that. I promise. I tried.
Especially where we are in the Upper Valley, I feel like sometimes in New York, there's more of a possibility of like running to weird stores downtown and sort of putting things together. But I find that at Northern Stage, it is often easier for you guys to build from scratch than for us to piece together with the resources available to us quickly here.
I think so.
And one of the big benefits of the city, or an area that has more theaters around it, is we all have relationships with our local theater companies, and we do lots of borrowing and trading. So I got a call from Weston Playhouse the other day that said, hey, we need 6 strobe lights and 32 normal lights and 800 feet of cable. And I had to go through my inventory and say, okay, we're using 400 feet of cable. You can have the other 400. And we're using 2 strobes, but we have 12, so you can have this many, and facilitating that sort of thing. So someday someone may come to James and say, I need to get a bed through a door. Thoughts?
Yeah.
And James can say, well, I have this weird bed that we built that one time. Let me just give it to you or loan it to you or rent it to you, whatever. So we hold on to a lot of strange things like that and share them with our local companies. And that's something that it's a lot easier to do in New York City, where there are lots of companies to go to ask for a weird bed, as opposed to around here, there's only 3 or 4.
True, but we have great relationships with them.
Yes.
Absolutely. And just to speak on your finding things locally, as the props master, I think I've been to every single antique store in the Upper Valley,
For sure.
and all the way down Route 4. I've visited every single one on multiple occasions. And, it does become a hunt. It becomes a hunt to find, because as a props master, I can say that while I interact with the scenic designer mainly, there's a lot of crossover from department to department, which especially with my job, because a lot of the times you think of a purse or a backpack or a briefcase or that kind of thing. A lot of the times that's handled by me, but would want to be dictated by the costume designer. There's a lot of crossover in that respect. And also a lamp, or just to give another example, lamps or Christmas lights, or what we would call practicals on stage. For instance, like a sconce that you would see on the side of the wall, that type of thing. Then I cross over with electrics, because it needs to be controlled by the light board and by the lighting crew, but it needs to look like what the scenic designer wants. So the crossover from department to department is really a huge thing. And then also the interplay between the director and the departments, making sure that we're fulfilling everything that the director wants on a show. So there's a lot of hats in the air, a lot of people in the room that you've got to work with, and it's a lot of problem solving, a lot of communication, which I think is really important.
And a lot of communication now that's happening over Zoom. I feel very lucky when I direct at Northern Stage, I get to just walk upstairs and bug these guys and see what they're working on. But most of our directors are, working other places based out of New York or LA, and are working on multiple projects at the same time. And all of our designers are from out of town as well. So we're having a lot of detailed artistic conversations that is happening over Zoom. And then we'll take a video of this prop or of this, element of the set that we've built and send it to you, or we'll try to FaceTime you in as we test something, so that there can be that back and forth before the designer shows up. And then sometimes we're lucky the designer will come out to do a site visit. Like Sasha, the designer who's working on You're in Town, just came out to visit for a couple of days. And what did you and Sasha work on while she was here?
Yeah, so Sasha came out. The big thing that we worked on together while she was here is there's a rotating wall that's all bottles and is fully powered by the actors on stage. It needs to spin around. It's double-sided. It needs to go under things and around things and not run people over and all kinds of stuff. So her big project with me, at least for this visit, was, making sure that that wall was not going to tip over on somebody because it's 10 feet tall, and making sure that it like spun nicely and was easy to move for two high school students to move because, at the end of the day, they're smaller and who knows who's going to have to move what during what scene. So you can get a 6'2" high schooler to a 5' tiny little high schooler who's never moved a thing in their life. And like, who knows who's going to move it? So it has to be super easy. And that was her big project with me. And through it, we, tested things, had to redo things, add wheels there, add a bigger handle because it was too much for it to be a small handle, lower. So it has to be up here. And it's a lot of like nitpicky detail things that make it simple in the room, but have to happen beforehand.
Absolutely.
And James had a lot of those conversations with Sasha as well.
Yeah, and this was actually the first chance that, so something that is in the process of developing a show for the Props Master, something that happens on a regular basis is a sit down between not just me and the scenic designer, but me and the director and the scenic designer. Because actors come in contact with the props so much more regularly than say with scenic pieces, normally the director has a lot of thoughts and feelings and of what the props need to accomplish on stage for the actor and for the piece itself. So the conversation between me, Sasha, the scenic designer, and Eric Love, the director, is something that was very important about this visit. Us sitting down, going through the props list piece by piece, no matter how small it is, and making sure that each piece accomplished both visually on Sasha's point of view, accomplished what Sasha wanted, but practically and also visually, but practically and accomplished everything that Eric wanted it to accomplish with the actions that the actors are going to have to do with these props. So the combination of those two mindsets, and then me coming in and on the engineering side, was very important, and that was the highlight of this trip and this visit from Sasha for me, because we really got to get in a room and look at everything and make sure it was gonna take all the boxes, for sure.
Something that's really difficult to do on Zoom that is so incredibly important to our work is getting things the right color. And on Zoom, my yellow is going to be different than what someone else's computer screen is showing as yellow. So one of the big things that we did when the scenic designer for the next show came into town was look at the very specific flavor of yellow that the set is going to be. And she had previously mailed us part of a tape measure that she chopped in half, and she stapled to it a piece of paper that said, "This is a great yellow reference. Make everything this color." But when we got it out, we were looking at it under different light than she was in her apartment. So when we looked at it, we painted everything the same yellow, which was slightly different than the yellow that she had imagined. So when she got out, she said, "Okay, that's great, but can you tone it all down like 2 shades and add a tiny bit more red?" So having her here ahead of time meant that we didn't have to do that like 3 days before the production opened.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, these sound like tiny details, but you can imagine that if, the whole set is yellow and you're going to be looking at it for 2 hours, you want it to be just the right color.
Yep.
So we've talked a little bit about the beginning of the process, the first set of draftings and renderings. We talked a little about a site visit. Now let's talk about tech. So what is the tech process for you once you've actually built the set and built the props and we've been in rehearsal? What are you doing throughout the tech process to complete the project?
Yeah, tech for me is seeing people on large pieces for the first time. It's, watching an actor cross a 10-foot tall platform for the first time. And you never know what's going to happen in those situations. You're like, I built it right. It's built well. It's going to hold them. But are they going to be afraid that they're going to fall here and want more railing? Are they going to be, this creaks a little bit and that makes them nervous? And you really have to be open to those changes and those little minor things that you would never notice because that's not something you notice while you're building. There's all kinds of noises. There's all kinds of weird things that you like. I'm putting the railing up, so of course there's no railing. You just don't think about it. And you can have all the support out in the world and they'll still find things, the director, the actors, costume designers, whoever, that need to be adjusted. So a lot of my process during tech is I'm in there and there will be a moment where a costume snags on this jagged corner that, wouldn't be a problem for hands, but for fabric, it wants to rip it. So, it's getting up and throwing tape on it until I can get a sander on it. It's, hey, this feels a little like wind, like floppy and stuff. Can we put a support here? And quickly tacking something on until I can get to it later. And that's a lot of my tech process, is learning those intricate details of this giant piece that I haven't seen bodies on until that moment. So a lot of mine comes from the actors, from the people on it, is where a lot of my tech process actually gets what I'm doing.
Yeah. So just to clarify, tech is the technical rehearsal before a show opens. I didn't know if we've got into that, and don't know if on Zoom what that is. But it normally is a 10-hour out of 12 hours. So normally it starts, 11 a.m. and goes to 11 p.m. And all the hours from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. are also used by the technical staff to do all the notes that Addison is talking about that come up during tech. But I will say the tech process starts a little earlier for me, I would say, because you skipped over the whole rehearsal process. The rehearsal process is huge for the prop shop, because that first day of rehearsal is, I've been working on things for 2, 3, 4 weeks beforehand, and I dread the first day of rehearsal, because the first day of rehearsal is the first time actors get hands on any of the props, and that's when I learn if anything's wrong, or if anything's gonna go wrong, or if anything needs to be changed, or if anything needs to be added. The rehearsal report that I get after the first day of rehearsal is normally, a few pages long. Add this, change this. We want this to be this way. We need 4 more dusters for the maids that are in this musical number, or something along those lines. So that's when the tech process really starts for me. And then once we get to the actual technical rehearsal and we move on to stage, my life turns a lot into what Addison is talking about. And we're on stage now and something's changed, so we'll take a note and address it, when we can get to it. So that's normally what tech is like. It's a lot of watching and waiting and learning of how being on stage has changed.
And there's moments in our tech processes where, something that has been set in stone for so long that we all thought wouldn't change needs to change. Mm-hmm. To reference something that happened recently, when we did Spamalot, we had a large rolling gate unit that was 10 feet tall and did not fit through our offstage doors. And it needed to fit through our offstage doors. It needed to go out, so there was space backstage. So over a 2-hour note session one night, between the actors being on stage and them coming back for, I believe, a dress rehearsal, me and James got up on ladders and chopped 2 feet off of this arch in that 2-hour span and got it ready for them to use that night. And so big things that do get set in stone, both props wise or scenic or both, can change in an instant. And that's what we discover in tech, often what's needed.
Absolutely.
And that tech process is really the moment when everyone comes together. So the folks have been in rehearsal working with the props and with the actors for a long time, and we've been building the set in the theater and hanging the lights and getting everything prepared. And that's the moment we all come into the room together. And working those 10-hour calls out of a 12-hour long day, you can imagine, are very stressful and they're very exhausting. And sure, we rehearse for 10 hours, but like they said, we work for 2 hours on either side and in the middle of the break. And the end of the day always ends with a meeting. So we'll have meetings at 11, 12, 1 a.m., something like that, to make sure that everyone in the technical staff as well as the creative staff gets the chance to make sure that those notes are communicated. So knowing that the gate unit needs a haircut is something that we might talk about at approximately 1 a.m. in the morning. So a lot of what my job is at that point is keeping everybody calm and making sure that we're all being friendly and nice to each other, because there are times when the scenic designer has designed something and really cannot design-wise handle the set being shorter. But the lighting designer needs it to be shorter so that they can shine their lights across it. And the stage manager needs it to be shorter because it has to fit out the door because there's nowhere else for it to go. So a lot of what I do is facilitating that conversation and making sure that the scenic designer is getting that information in a calm and like healthy way, as opposed to someone coming to them and saying, you have to chop this down. You don't have a choice, just do it. And instead saying, look, like these are the problems we're having. This is the way that we need to solve this problem. Can we work together to find a solution? And as you can imagine at 1 a.m., that can be kind of tough. So a lot of what I do during that process is facilitate and then help with the problem solving. So if Addison and James didn't have time to chop the gate unit down a little bit, that might be something that I would hop in and say, all right, like, give me the sawzall. I'll give it a haircut, help figure it out. So the tech process can be really an all hands on deck. Like it's a big moment to come together as a team.
Theater is an incredibly collaborative art form. And I think a lot of times when I explain the technical process to people who don't work in our field, I think it's so strange that we work such long days. And when folks have asked me why, I mean, part of it is tradition and is sort of how our union has built our work days. We work under the guidelines of the actors union primarily, but also sometimes musicians union, directors union. So there's a lot of specifications about how we work to make sure that the actors get breaks. But it also is sometimes when we are teching a show, there will be 100 people in the room working on the show because there's the cast, there's all of the design team, the director, the creative team, there's all of the Northern Stage production staff supporting them, as well as sometimes folks from the administrative side who need to oversee, company management, HR kind of issues. So we can sometimes have, even at Northern Stage, which is a smaller theater, 100 folks in the room. And so when you're going to ask 100 people to work together, you kind of want to do it for a concentrated amount of time. And so that's why our process is kind of built like that. And I will also say artistically, there's something compelling about you're in the middle of this very deep collaborative work and you kind of just want to keep going. As a director, I love long tech days because, if the show is 2 hours long, sometimes it takes 4 or 5 hours to work through the opening sequence of the show. It always is a little slower as you get started. And then once the team finds a rhythm, you can go a little bit faster through the rest of the play. But there is also something about the way we work in order to sort of say, okay, let's all just be together now. Everyone is here focusing on whatever problem it is that comes up.
Yeah, it's the tunnel vision effect. When you get so focused on a project and everybody is focused on that one project and that one goal, you kind of don't want to leave the theater. You want to, get to the finish line. And I agree. I think I know on days where Helen has been very, very a great boss and has said, James, you're working too much, go home. And I'm like,
they're very good at telling all of us.
And I'm like, I don't want to. I love my job. I love what I'm doing. I'm focused on, I want to finish the project. I want to do. And you get like that, and you get zoned in. You kind of, it is a great feeling, but very nicely, so get some rest.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of the attitude we go into these texts with is, we want to accomplish this goal. So it's kind of great.
A big aspect of my job is to balance the artistic and then the physical needs of the team achieving the goals. So I have said to James many times, with all the love in my heart, I don't want to see you tomorrow. Get out. Like, I love you, go away. You need to sleep for 24 hours and then you can come back. And it's because it's so easy to get excited about a project. It's so easy to get excited about it that you just dig in and you keep going and going and going. And suddenly it's Monday and you've worked an insane amount of hours over the weekend and you haven't slept and you come into work and it's impossible to handle someone coming to you and saying, chop 2 feet off the arch. And so a really big part of my job is kind of keeping an eye on the team and saying, your art is beautiful. I'm so impressed by the work that you're doing. Please take care of yourself too. And please think about yourself as an individual in addition to working as a team, because no one would be in theater if we weren't so deeply passionate about it, because it's hard work and it's a lot of hours and it's a lot of personalities in a room that you have to work with, whether you like them or not. And finding a way to kind of love and support each other throughout that whole process is something that can be difficult, but is a true necessity to work through the design process and opening a show.
And so rewarding too. Yeah.
Incredibly rewarding.
And I think, I think it's great, Helen, also the way we're talking about building towards sustainability as a company, because I think that it's one thing if you, as a director, I maybe work on 2 or 3 shows a year. So there's a certain period in the year where I'm in that tech process and it's very intense as a director. And you sort of just know, right? In any job, you have your sprints and you have your deadlines. But as a production department, they support every single show we do all year, which can be 6 main stage shows, 3 education shows, plus a couple workshops. So they can't be up all night for every show because they'll be up all night every other week throughout the year. And there is a huge issue of burnout in our field, and especially in the production department for that reason. And so I think as a field, we're all adjusting, as so many other industries are, especially after in the midst of the pandemic, to how can we create more sustainable structures so that these jobs don't burn folks out by the time they hit 30. That is not our goal.
Yeah. When the pandemic started, I had been working as our master electrician for a year or 2. And, we shut down and we were all kind of in our apartments, not sure what to do. And I didn't get bored for the first 3 months because I just rested and slept. And it was not nice because it was a terrible time, but I had burnt myself out so badly, just going and going and going and pushing and pushing and pushing, that when the pandemic started, I was like, oh, I'm like really grateful to sleep for a little while.
I'm so glad I wasn't the only one to say
Oh,
that.
everybody so when we came back, one of my big goals was to not let myself get that way again, and not let the people who were in the position that I had been in get to the same place, because we don't always have a month to sleep. And so we really have to be conscious of it. And the pandemic really highlighted that for all of us.
I feel like this is a great moment to open it up. I don't know if any of our friends on Zoom have any questions for us, or our library friends in the room. If there's anything else you'd like to hear about.
I'm not seeing any on Zoom so far, but I am curious myself about actually so many things after having heard this. This opened this vast window for me into a world I only see from the audience seat. It's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, with sets and props, did you get formal training in carpentry, metalwork, all of these skills along, or did you just pick it up as you do it along the way?
My personal experience with it is I grew up in a household of construction. My parents are in the field of construction. I grew up on job sites. I grew up, around carpenters and welders and such. So carpentry for me, 100% I got professional training from. I got it in both school for theater. I got it at home. Same with welding and such. But there's also, I would say, plenty of things that you become skilled in, especially in tech, all the way across the board, where it's like, building these impossible things that don't exist anywhere else. You're like, I know now how to, build a rocking horse from tinfoil and gum. And you're like, no one could ever teach you that. So there are plenty of those skills I have picked up, not in the professional world, but in like carpentry and welding. Yes, I've been formally educated personally.
Yeah. So when I was formally educated in high school with carpentry, and welding. And then when I went to college, I took courses in a multitude of art forms with a multitude of medias. I need to drink water, sorry. I apologize. Through fine woodworking, ceramics, resin work, upholstery, working with metalworking other than steel, because I had welding from high school, but with silver work and copper and brass and smelting and things like that. So, definitely was very fortunate to go to school, and to a great school that offered a lot of training in multiple medias, and learning through that process. And then, I agree with Addison. There are some things that you learn on the job, just from the crazy requests you get, how to build a wall out of milk cartons and something we're working on now.
Yep.
I mean, I've never done it before.
I haven't.
So it's a brand new thing. So yeah, definitely learning on the job, but formal training definitely helps because you learn how to approach it.
Yeah.
I think, going through that training, and, even though it's a problem you've never addressed,
Yeah.
had before.
And there's also plenty of opportunities where we're handed material that just isn't used in the everyday and they don't teach classes for it. And we have to figure out what to do with that. We have these clouds on Spamalot that I knew because I'm a big old nerd and knew how to make clouds like that because I've done wall clouds that you put lights behind, but they have this plastic corrugated piece behind it. And we had to figure out how to keep them up in the air, keep them rigid, and also make them look three-dimensional like a big cloud and what that takes. And, there's no guide that comes of like, how do you cut this well so it doesn't cut people when it's chopped up or doesn't fall apart in an instant? And so we get handed a lot of stuff like that as well, which is learning on the job as well.
Yeah.
There are some things in theater, though, that similarly you can't be taught ahead of time, but you have to learn. So I spent a lot of years as an electrician, and I had a very different experience. I didn't have any formal training in it. I maybe took one class in college that was electrical safety. So, how not to electrocute myself. But other than that, it was all on the job training. So learning how to hang a light, to repair a light, to take it apart, put it back together, make something new out of those like strange and odd parts was something that I just kind of figured out along the way. And then I might have one person say, okay, this is how this specific thing works. And I would have to then take that information and figure out how it works for every other different type of light, or how one cable might be different from another cable. So there are some times that you just have to kind of jump in and do it and figure it out. And by the time that you're done, you'll be an expert.
And I think we've all experienced the community, the theater community worldwide is so focused on the growth of the community's knowledge that you can reach out. Say you're having a problem with something on a show, you can reach out and throw out feelers on Facebook. There are multiple communication boards talking about scenic props, costumes, lighting, all the problems that we come up with. And hey, how did you build a remote control chicken for this one show? Oh, well, we did it this way and we had it controlled this way, and that kind of thing. You can talk to a props master, technical director, or a master electrician across the country, and ask how and everyone is so happy to address those questions because it is about the growth of the knowledge of the community itself. So it's something really great and something I love about the theater.
I think that's a really great point. And sometimes when you're doing especially a well-known or classic show, sometimes we'll have those conversations preemptively. Mm-hmm. So I'm actually not at Northern Stage at Weston Playhouse. I'm directing Steel Magnolias this summer, which obviously has a lot of hair. So we've called other theaters that have done the show recently to sort of say, how did you do the water spray moment? How did you, what kind of wigs did you actually manipulate on stage? Those kind of questions. Sort of checking in with colleagues in the field about their responses helps you build your arsenal of tools for how to approach it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very much so.
So I have a question. You kind of hinted at this earlier, but what do you do with all the props after the show? And the set? I'm also just thinking back to when I did tech crew in high school, and are they called flats? The parts, and in the back is just covered in years of graffiti.
Yep.
Yep. You want to do sets first?
Yeah. So Northern Stage, the way that we handle sets afterwards is I'll go in for strike, that we'll have those flats that live there for years and have things written on it from years past that we'll keep and we'll, take apart and dismantle and put away for special storage. And then there's plenty of stuff where it's like, this is covered in glue and staples and would take 6 days to make it clean and usable again. So it's just going to go elsewhere, or one of our technicians is like, oh, I actually have a fun art project I want to do with it, and it will get reused and recycled in that way, not in our space. So a lot of set, it really depends piece by piece, set by set. I will say flats and like platforms that people stand on are really what stick around, and then everything else is kind of up for debate, depending.
And there is kind of a universal standard within the industry of things that you save and things that you don't save, and the way you build things affects that. So one of the most common things you'll find in every single theater is platforms that are 4 feet by 8 feet. And they're just big old rectangles made out of like a nice heavy duty plywood. And we will save those and reuse them for every show we possibly can. And so sometimes a designer will reach out and they'll say, okay, how many 4x8s do you have? I will make my set the size of the platforms that you have so that we don't have to spend the money on our budget to build more of them. We can spend it on something more exciting. So Addison does a lot of thinking ahead of, okay, what the next few shows might need this weird platform. I guess we should save it. Or nobody's ever going to need this again. We should dismantle it.
And what's fun about that is a lot of those weird platforms come from stock and then are added upon. So you're like, oh, great, this weird jigsaw puzzle piece. How can I throw those 4x8 platforms in there and make them work?
Yeah, and the same, we save a lot more in the props department, I think, than the scenic department does, mainly because the sets are huge and we don't have the space to save everything from the scenic world. But from the props world, I have some, I think every props master has some hoarding tendencies. I think it's a job requirement. It really is. And, I'm very lucky to be able to, address those tendencies at my work. So I don't, my apartment's not exploding with things, which is very nice. But I think, yeah, we definitely have a large stock of furniture and we're lucky because we do have the space for it. There are a lot of theaters that don't have the space to have a large stock, but we have a large stock of furniture and props and hand tchotchkes and dinnerware and bar carts. And I have a jukebox. I have a giant $2,000 chandelier that is 4 feet wide and 5 feet tall, hanging in my shop. I think there comes a point where you look at a prop and there are some props that are so show specific that you'll never use again. And those are the ones that you go, okay, we built this for this show. It'll never be used again. I might keep it for a year and see if there's another theater that might want it. And then after that, okay, we'll never use this again. Let's dismantle it or recycle it or sometimes throw it away. I know, taboo and, we don't want to throw anything away, but, so sometimes that's how you have to approach it. And, sometimes there's things that, I'm never throwing this table away. We'll use it in every single show. There are tables that I've used in, twice in a year, but we don't want to repeat too much. But we'll reuse it and use it and use it and use it and use it. So you have to approach every prop differently for sure.
And I think show specific is a great way to answer that question as a whole for not just me and James, but also places like costumes, where it's sometimes there's a piece that will never ever be used again for anything but this one show. And that happens to all of us. And especially like mine happens a lot more because sets change so often. But something like a typewriter is always going to be around. Something like a flapper girl dress always will have a use somewhere. And show specific is where that line kind of draws what we keep and what we don't.
Like the mermaid tails from Little Mermaid. You're not really going to use mermaid tails in any other show, right? So what do you do with it?
But sometimes we do keep things for sentimental value. We are big hoarders, but one of the things that we love is that all of our spaces are kind of an art gallery of previous work that we've done. So if a show has a sign in it, you're definitely going to see that sign on the wall in the scene shop in 5 years. Because while we're not going to use it again, it's really cool to have a sign that you spent 40 hours working on that says Camp Athens or something like that. And sometimes things end up in our apartments. So I have some sconces that we built for a production of Frozen a while ago that I wanted to hold on to because I thought they were cool and we would never need them again.
They were being thrown out if anybody from Northern Stage is watching. We're not stealing. We're not stealing, I promise. Got them out of the trash. That's fine.
I have a big Rydell High poster from when I did Grease a long time ago because I had to go hang the thing every night. And so I was like, I'm keeping this.
Because if the company doesn't want it, we would rather it go to someone who loves it and cares about it than end up in the trash or dismantled.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One more question. I'm curious, the example of the half-eaten yogurt was fascinating for what a complex problem that turned out to be.
Yeah.
And it made me wonder, do you have stories of things that scripts or directors asked of you that you despaired of figuring out, although I'm sure you finally did? What were some really challenging tasks you were given?
Do you want challenging that turned out to be easy, or do you want challenging that did turn out to be challenging? Because I can give you both.
Whatever story you want to tell.
Okay. One that seemed really challenging and weird was not at this space, but it was a story from my past. My last theater had a large 36-foot turntable in it. I had a designer who wanted to put a set that didn't move and didn't turn on this turntable on it, but he wanted a mini turntable on the big turntable for the piano to be in. And then that would turn on its own power. And I was like, I have no idea how that's going to happen. And it ended up being the simplest thing of a winch surrounded the edge of it. And one of the stage managers, walked up to the back at that moment in the show, put one of our drills on it, and sat there with a drill and slowly turned the entire piano and music director in the midst of the show. And it was crazy fun to figure out, because it was, I dreaded it from a moment when I'm like, oh, this isn't going to work, or this is going to look so dumb, or it's not going to move very fast, because I thought they were going to have to hand crank it and all kinds of things. And it turned out to be one of the most beautiful elements of that design and show that I never could have imagined at day one. It had no idea how I was going to approach it from day one.
I think so. So when I put together a props list, it's just what I read in the script. And I was going through a props list for A Streetcar Named Desire when I was doing it. And in the script, it says the main character Stella opens a bag of chips. Like, cool, bag of chips. Wrote that on the props list. Not a problem. Thought it was going to be easy. I'll buy some bags of chips. Not thinking that, oh, wait, it has to be like I forget the time period, 1920s bag of chips. Oh, where am I going to find a 1920s bag of chips? Again, I can't just buy them, and I can't print them out and put, because it's special paper. And then how do I reseal it every night to where it pops open? And it becomes, the problems just get, compound on themselves. So that was one of the ones that I was just like, how am I going to do this? And I spent, I'd say, 2 weeks trying to figure out how to make a 1920s bag of chips. And one day the director walks in and he sees me. I don't have any hair now, but back then I had hair and I was pulling my hair out. I was just going crazy with this bag of chips. And he looks at it and he's like, oh, we could just use a brown paper bag and with some chips. And I was so excited that I didn't have to work on this project anymore, but also I was like, you could have told me 2 weeks ago, so it's those moments that, it's really stick in your mind, because you're like, okay, never 1920s bag of chips, I'm never going to do it again. It's that kind of.
Consumable props are often the trickiest, and there are some, I feel like, tricks of the trade, because the number of times that we have had to figure out how to open beer or soda cans on stage, but it can't actually have beer in it. And so it has to be filled with something else that the actors can drink. And I feel like there's a couple like secrets of the props world for getting that can to pop, because every props master faces that.
Yeah. I'm not telling you the secrets.
My favorite one of those that we did very recently is for our current production of Side by Side, which is open right now. We needed a bikini that would light up. And the bikini had to light up in 3 separate ways. And the actor couldn't control it, but she couldn't have any wires connecting her to anything else. So it had to be all wireless. And somehow we got to tech and the bikini hadn't been figured out. And so they said, Helen, you've got some spare time. Here's a bikini, make it light up. And I spent probably 30 or so hours with like a soldering iron and LED tape, like soldering it to the bikini and like wrapping it in wire and putting hot glue on it so that the metal bikini wouldn't like cross connect the leads and cause it all to shock the actors or something like that. And then figuring out how to put it on a battery. Each part had to be separately controlled. So was it going to be 3 batteries and 3 switches? But that was too complicated to make the actress like sing, dance, and activate 3 different switches at the same time. So we had to find like a very specific piece of technology that would allow us to control it via our light board. And I made this piece and I spent so much time figuring it out, and we put it on the actress and we turned it on and it didn't work. And I couldn't figure out why. And it turns out I had wrapped it in wire, and the wire had connected all of the leads. And so the whole thing was electric. And so it wasn't lighting up because all of the chains of the bikini were drawing all of the power out of the battery. So
The
I had,
actress wasn't harmed.
yes, no, everyone was fine.
The actress wasn't harmed.
It was like a little AA battery, like it was fine. So I had to go through and undo every aspect that I had just done and redo it all with a different kind of wire that was covered in plastic, like I thought the original one had been, because that's what James told me it was.
Oh, you're no. We'll get into this later.
So there's a lot of things that you figure it out and you get it perfect, but then you put it on stage and you're like,
Doesn't work.
I broke it accidentally. Let me restart.
The bikini is fabulous.
It is. It's great.
That feels like
Wonderful.
a perfect segue to our closing.
Yeah, sure.
Side by Sondheim is the show we have running right now in the Courtyard Theater, which features a set built by Addison and props built by James and a bikini starred by Helen. So you should definitely come check it out. And then next up inside the theater is our education students are doing Urinetown, this musical that we will be able to see the Money Fan in action with
Money
some
Fan.
singing and dancing and the wall of milk bottles. And if you are ever interested in learning more about the tech process, we do sometimes do backstage tours or invited evenings of tech. So feel free to reach out to any of us because we do love to invite audience members in to see a little bit more live of what it's like as we all put it together. But thank you three for taking the time this evening to talk about it. And thank you to the Howe Library team for setting this up. It's really fun to get to spend some time telling our crazy stories.
Thank you all so much. This was wonderful.
Having